Hello, I'm Kelly with the Montana Urban and Community Forestry Association, and I'm joined by Dr. Megan Paulette from Rocky Mountain College. We are excited to share this presentation with you. Earlier this year, we presented this work at the Arbor Day Foundation's Partner in Community Forestry Conference. And the purpose of our presentation is to share our approach to conducting a statewide urban forestry assessment in Montana and how we are using these findings to develop Montana's first urban forestry workforce program. And this is the question that's really been guiding our work, is how do we develop an urban forestry workforce that meets the needs of both rural professionals and communities? And while we've been learning from other workforce models, which tend to be designed for larger urban areas, we recognize that they don't entirely translate that well to what we need for our state. And so this led us to conducting a statewide urban forestry assessment to better understand how to build a workforce model that truly fits Montana's rural needs. And to share our approach, we will start by setting the stage with some context about Montana's rural landscape and why that matters for workforce development. Then we'll walk you through our multi-layered research approach, how we designed and implemented a community survey, a professional survey, and an assessment of degree and non-degree programs. And then we'll touch on what's next and how we're using these findings to design a workforce model and strategy for our state. So to step back for a moment and talk about the place that we're working in, Montana's rural landscape looks a little different in every corner of the state, and that variety really shapes how we are thinking about building an urban forestry workforce. And so to illustrate what we mean by a rural landscape, I encourage you to take a moment to look at these images and which image comes to mind when you think of a rural community. Is it farmland with dispersed houses, perhaps a suburb, or maybe a city of 15,000 or even 100,000 people? Or is it something different? So, as rural may mean different things to each of us, for our work, we are defining all of these settings as rural. And more broadly, we argue that our entire state in Montana works within a rural framework, because here's what our population numbers look like. Montana's largest city has about 120,000 people, and there's only 6 other cities with more than 30,000 residents. 91% of our 128 incorporated cities have fewer than 5,000 people, and if we include unincorporated cities, about 90% of Montana's communities are under 2,500 people. This map here helps put this further into context. It shows urban areas and urban clusters, meaning communities with more than 2,500 residents. And we can see that Montana and much of the interior West has relatively smaller population sizes compared to more densely populated areas of the country. And when we look at who's responsible for trees across Montana, there's a clear trend that mirrors community size. In our smallest towns, those under 500, it's often mayors or city clerks who take on responsibility for trees on top of everything else that they do. And as we move up to communities between 500 and 5,000 people, that responsibility typically shifts towards public works departments, but they often have to prioritize other essentials such as sewer, water, mowing parks. So with these smaller communities, tree boards and other volunteers often step up in a big way in helping manage the urban forests. And once towns reach about 5,000 to 14,000 people, we usually see a Parks and Recreation department that has staff responsible for taking on tree responsibilities. But it's not until our cities reach 30,000 that we finally see one full-time urban forester. But even with these larger cities, they still face challenges with managing their urban forests in terms of staffing and funding. And so for our statewide assessment, we included all of these municipal staff in our survey to better understand their specific community needs and workforce challenges. And of course, it's not just city staff and tree boards who manage Montana's urban forests. So we also invited a wide range of other urban forestry professionals, representing the public, the private, the nonprofit sector to participate in our professional survey. And it's worth noting that their reach varies widely across our state. For example, some cities may have multiple tree care companies, where other communities may not have any and may need to bring in contractors from as far as 200 miles away. And this map sort of further highlights this gap. We can see that in the shaded blue color, these are our regional center counties, which serve as hubs for our surrounding more isolated rural counties, where access to training and professionals in the shaded gray and tan color can often be really limited. And so this emphasizes the need for us to develop a targeted workforce strategy that supports both of our Montana's regional hubs, as well as our small remote communities. I'll now walk you through our process of conducting a multi-layered research approach to better understand how we are developing a targeted workforce strategy for our rural state. So our first step for our assessment was to conduct a literature review, so we didn't completely reinvent the wheel. We looked at how other studies have approached similar questions, like Howard and Peterson's 2016 Municipal Tree Care and Management Study in the United States, as well as Kaminsky and colleagues' study of workforce development needs for forestry professionals in the state of Wisconsin. And we actually connected with these researchers early on to learn from their process and adapt their methodology to fit our rural context. And we were actually really excited as we ended up hiring one of these lead researchers, Zoe Kaminsky, to lead our research design and data analysis for our two surveys. Next, we formed an advisory committee of 16 members representing different urban forestry sectors across our state. And we held a strategic planning workshop about 1 year ago to have this advisory committee define our goals and objectives for our assessment. And they developed this three-part framework. So in addition to the community survey and professional survey, we analyzed degree and non-degree programs offered by higher education institutions in Montana to see how current education programs either align or don't align with what communities and professionals need. Next, to refine our survey questions that we were using from our example studies. We held two focus groups with key stakeholders, and we asked questions like what skills make you good at your job, what training should be offered in the future, to identify relevant workforce questions that are perhaps more unique to our context here in Montana. And this slide is showing some of the examples of the categories of questions we asked for both our community survey and professional survey. For our community survey, which we adapted from Howard and Peterson's study, we asked a wide range of questions to really understand how tree policies, management, staffing, and budgeting works across Montana's communities. And then for the professional survey, which we adapted from Zeminski and colleagues, we focused on questions to identify what professionals' preferred training formats are, as well as their motivations for pursuing trainings. But then across both of these surveys, we asked communities and professionals what are their training needs and what are their barriers to receiving trainings. Then for our survey distribution, this was the most challenging step of our process. We thought it would take 2 months. It ended up taking 4. We relied, or thankfully, we relied on a lot of partner organizations to help disseminate our surveys. We sent multiple emails, we used social media, we reached out by phone calls. Some of our respondents ended up receiving 8 forms of reminders just from myself. But despite this extra effort, we ended up with a strong sample size. 71 out of our 128 incorporated cities completed the community survey. That's a 55% respondent rate. Then we had 93 urban forestry professionals complete our professional survey, which met our minimum sample size of 70, giving us a good representation of the state. And then Megan and I thought it was worth noting that we had originally planned to include unincorporated cities and towns in our um, community survey. Um, Unincorporated communities, they don't have municipal staff, so they are often relying on volunteer efforts for their urban forestry programs. And so we tried to find contacts for these communities. We started reaching out to county offices who advised us to reach out to fire departments. And this ended up just being this wild goose chase, was reaching out through a number of other different means, which ended up being really time consuming and didn't really result in much progress. So this disappointed emoji underestimates how we actually felt, as we do feel that this is a population that we don't know if our workforce program will be meeting their unique needs. But then for the third part of our assessment framework, Megan led this initiative with her student intern, Shauna, at Rocky Mountain College, and they conducted a content analysis of Montana's 27 higher education institutes to identify degree and non-degree programs and the courses that they offer related to urban forestry. Now for some of our key findings for the community survey. When we analyzed the data, we aggregated findings by population size and saw both similarities and differences when it came to technical training needs. For our smaller communities, their top preferences were for planting and planning related trainings, whereas our larger cities highlighted maintenance as one of their top three training priorities. And so we believe this sort of reflects the different stages that communities in Montana may be at with their urban forestry programming, where smaller towns are trying to get programs started or restarted, while larger cities are focusing on maintaining their urban forests. But interestingly, tree selection emerged as a common need across all of our communities, regardless of size. So this sort of speaks that communities want guidance on which trees are suitable for their geography, climate, and soils. For example, this is a picture of Chinook, Montana. They have 300 public trees, but 100 of these trees are dead or dying, mostly all green ash, and they need to be removed. So many communities are in similar situations where trees planted decades ago haven't been maintained or are aging out, and they need to know what to replace them with. For the question that we asked regarding what our community social training needs, we saw a lot more similarities with the top training needs across our different population sizes. And maybe not too surprisingly, these top priorities were identifying funding sources and writing successful grants. So this shows that communities across Montana, they want more funding, they want to expand their urban forestry programs, but with limited budgets and lack of workforce capacity, they are not able to do so. So this is a challenge that we need to figure out how to address with our workforce program. I will now hand it over to Megan to share our professional survey findings.
So for our professional survey findings, what we did find was a real disconnect between training needs and training interests. So while we saw folks identify things like pest and disease diagnosis as a high both training desire and training need, otherwise we did not see a relationship there. So folks are identifying AI and technology and site assessments as a skills gap, but we're prioritizing tree mortality, soil quality, and tree care maintenance as the training needs that they most wanted. Similar disconnect when we look at the social training needs and interest. Strategic planning comes out on top for both. No big surprises there. Otherwise, same disconnect. So folks are identifying a skill gap as more of the social media and digital communications, grant writing, policy writing and creation, but the training topics they were most interested in were advocacy, team building, and more on the professional skill development side of things. And if we take a look at barriers to training participation, the number one that comes out, no surprises here, workload and job responsibilities. We need to do a good job of advertising training opportunities. That gets flagged here. And then training location is definitely giving an interest of concern, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. In terms of training motivations, very interesting here in that folks are really motivated to improve their job skills. They want to learn new skills, they want to perform their job more effectively. And what we see coming out low on this scale is the increase in their business or their salary. So we really see a desire here for skill building and professional development. And then, as promised, we come back to distance, willing to travel for training. So we see preferred professional development settings that people want local opportunities, and they really only want to travel 50 to 150 miles. Montana is a really big state. And so training opportunities in one part of the state are often unavailable to folks that are really spread out in this rural context. And they really want these in-person conferences, classes, workshops, trainings, field trips, and networking events. And their desired format here is in person. So we have some interest in online if it is live and instructor led or some kind of short webinar, but by and large, folks want in-person hands-on training that's relatively close to home. Again, a challenge in a state that's as big as Montana. And so if we look at what kind of training opportunities are present across the state, really what we want to look to is the Montana university system. So unlike a lot of states, we do not have that many private colleges here in the state of Montana. There are 3 of them. So the majority of our higher education opportunity and professional development programs are offered through the Montana university system. And these are spread out across the state. This is not a fully representative map, but again, I encourage you to look at the scope of the state. If you look at that scale across the top, 600 miles. So if people are really wanting to travel 50 to 100 miles as their preferred distance here, you can see what a challenge this is going to be. But the opportunities that could be possible in the Montana university system. So we have 7 colleges and universities. We have in the University of Montana system, 6 in the Montana state system. We have several community colleges, possibly unique to Montana, although certainly not the Intermountain West. We have a number of tribal colleges with good geographic representation across the state. And then again, those 3 private colleges. So what I'd like you to focus on here is college enrollment rate. So if you look pre-COVID, 2015 to post-COVID, 2023, 2024, you can see a real decline in college enrollment rates from a peak of 45% down into the low 30%. And this definitely reflects the nationwide trend. Keep in mind, this is high school students immediately enrolling in the Montana university system. So this is certainly not representative of every Montana student, but this is a pretty good look at the general trend that we're seeing. For students enrolling in college out of high school. And you can see graduation rates there too. So the bottom line here is that we're seeing enrollment in the Montana university system in decline. And then if we look at degrees and certificates awarded over that same period of time, extending back to 2006, and keep in mind, Montana University System, this graph isn't just looking at Montana residents. This is going to include out-of-state students. So bear that in mind. So we look generally, degrees are pretty flat over the last few years, decline a little bit post-COVID and on the way back up. The important graph here is the one on the right where we look at certificates awarded, that black line there. This is going to be serving our Montana students. So these are not students that are seeking 2 or even 4-year degrees. These are students that are seeking professional certificates awarded through the Montana University system. And this is where we'd expect to see a good fit for some of our urban forestry training needs. And there is demand here. This has also received a lot of focus at the statewide level and at the public school system level in making these opportunities available and making students aware of these certificate and professional development opportunities. And so if we tie this to what you need to be a certified arborist, so if we're looking at ISA certs, a good kind of look at what you need to be successful in this field. You can have a 2-year degree, you can have a 4-year degree, you can have a diploma or certificate. This is tied to hours of practice and hours of coursework. But if we look at this holistically, you need at least a few classes where you're taking some specific urban forestry or arboriculture classes. And so if we look at where those classes or things that would help train you for this profession would be offered across the state, we see that they're just not. So if we look across the Montana State University system, we have associate's degrees with a general focus on science or applied science, no general focus on forestry. There's 1 bachelor's of science in forestry at the University of Montana. The focus is wildland, not urban forestry. The tribal colleges definitely are doing a better job here. We have associate's and bachelor's degrees at several tribal colleges. But again, the focus is on forestry broadly, not urban forestry, definitely more of a natural resource focus. We have no certificate programs building any of these skills. We have no direct urban forestry programming outside of one urban forestry class offered at the University of Montana. And again, where we do see these courses offered across the Montana University system, they tend to be very natural resource focused. And again, if we go back to looking at that ISA certification, what do most of our trained arborists have in terms of education level? We see a pretty good representation here. So a fair number of these professionals have some college training, whether that's a certificate, an associate's, or a bachelor's degree. We do see that training coming from some kind of university system. And so if we look again at where these kind of classes are offered, so having done a survey of the catalogs of these different schools, we can see where we do have relevant coursework, again, looking at ISA certified arborist topics of interest. We see things like plant identification or soil science are the classes that tend to show up across our university system. So these are going to hit broadly, not specifically at urban forestry, to these top 3 topical areas. If you look at 4 through 10, more on the practical side of things, we have very limited to no options. These are largely not addressed in the course catalog. The certificate programs, the associate's degrees, and the bachelor's degrees offered across the state of Montana. And so this really points to something that came out at the conference, this idea of promoting arboriculture as a viable profession. And we do not seem to be doing this in a comprehensive way in the University of Montana system. So we do not have a program like you see here at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where we are offering associates or bachelor's programs with a focus on urban forestry. You can see the classes they have here. This is just an example, extremely practical and hands-on, which are what shows up in the training desires that we see for our professionals in Montana. So plants and landscaping, sensible pruning for beginners and experts, very hands-on, very practical and applied classes. And we don't offer these classes. And so it points to a need in the state of Montana to think about developing more programming to get at these professional competencies.
So now that we've highlighted some of these key findings, how are we using this data to inform our next steps to actually building a workforce program for our state? As Megan highlighted, there's really no formal higher education program in our state designed to get youth into urban forestry careers, and there's trends that youth are interested to pursue certificate pathways. And so we're focusing on creating a paid certificate pathway that connects Montana youth to urban forestry careers. And we have formed a leadership committee of 9 invested statewide and national partners who have been guiding our initiative. We meet monthly to make decisions, to shape strategy. We're using our findings now to think about our curriculum design and to also reach out to potential employer partners to co-design our curriculum and model. We also now have this flyer defining our program vision and target youth participants. And given that we will be the first to develop an urban forestry youth workforce program for our state, we've been really grateful to have the coaching and support from PowerCore Philadelphia and being able to use their tested tools and models and their guidance through this process. And just to note that, our biggest takeaway that we've also learned from other workforce models is that this really needs to take place in collaboration with partners, as no one organization is able to lead this alone. So with this, I'd like to give a final thanks to the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation for their technical support and funding for our statewide urban forestry assessment. If you have questions, ideas, insights, are interested in partnering with us or getting more involved, please reach out to myself or Dr. Paulette. Our emails are provided here, and we would love to hear from you. Thank you.